This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. Today we have a UFO related interview about Roswell, the famous alleged alien crash. There's a gentleman out here that is a lawyer, Christopher Johnson. He has a new book, Roswell, The Truth on Trial, that's available now on Amazon. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing great, Hannibal. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. What got you interested in doing this as a lawyer?
Well, let me work it in reverse order. Maybe going back the interest in UFOs. I say some kids bond with their dad with fishing or sports or what have you. I'll just out myself. I'm 55. I was born in '69, so a little kid in the '70s, kind of right when things were kind of coming into the mainstream, and that was my dad's deal. He was sci-fi, UFO, anything he could watch, get his hands on. So to carve out time with my dad, I got into UFOs. And, over the years, as we all do, interests wax and wane, pardon me, and that kind of thing. And, then kids, but I've always had that real interest in UFOs and asking the questions and kind of critical thinking. So finally reached that point where the kids were out of the nest and I had all this free time and finally had the ability to kind of blend my interests of trial work with UFOs. And I'll tell you, that took some thinking because they're pretty two disparate topics. And so it took some thinking and finagling to kind of put together something that I thought, I could be proud of. So, but it all, like lots of us, started as a little kid and has just carried through.
So you mentioned being interested in it as a little kid with your father. I've been researching it in recent years and discovered that there was more information out back then than I realized. But what made him such a believer back then?
And he's passed away now, and that's, I think, like a lot of us, if X-Files were a thing back then, he would have had the "I want to believe" poster. He just very critical mind, very creative, just always thinking. And I suppose, a lot of it, easiest point, I think he would fall into that same path as me. I think it's the height of arrogance to think that you and I are kind of the top of the deal in the entire universe. I think that's a pretty easy takeaway for a lot of people, even if they're not willing to, make the leap as to what's there, that kind of thing. Many people, I'm sure my dad included, is just simply, this can't be it.
So he wasn't an experiencer at all. It was just the desire to know more.
Right. Kind of a somewhat related little anecdote, but I learned a lot from this anecdote. My dad took a stab at writing science fiction in the '70s, and he sent a manuscript to Isaac Asimov. And he got a letter back, and that letter was framed in our house forever, that said, in essence, hey, when you're writing science fiction, there's the fiction part, but the science has to be correct. You can't just make up, I made it to Mars in a day and a half and that kind of thing. So there's certainly, he was a science-oriented as a profession. And so kind of like I've done with law, he started, as years went on, trying to take a more science-y approach to what he was doing with that, Asimov saying in the back of his head, what's the science?
So as far as his research back then, would it be going to libraries, getting books, ordering books online? Because I guess there would have been TV specials here and there, but it's not like you could just sit on the internet for hours looking at video after video like you can now.
Right. Yep. He would have done it the old timey way, heading down to the library. And, and I do have some, memories, particularly the late '70s. And I'm drawing a blank, but, Roswell, which I know we're going to get to, a lot of us, even people in the know, we just sort of assume, well, Roswell's been a thing since 1947, which it has, but it was in no way a cultural touchstone, if you will, until Stanton Friedman really started digging into it in the '70s. So I think a lot of the heightened awareness of the UFO topic generally can be traced back to Mr. Friedman in the 70s with his work that he did on Roswell. So it was a good time to be interested. It was sort of this new up and coming topic at the time.
Was Roswell one of the most credible events that you were aware of that made you think, hey, this might be more than science fiction? Or was there anything else that kind of caught your attention and you would tell people about, well, I know there's some stuff that seems cheesy, but this seems pretty realistic.
Yeah, Roswell for me, is very high on the list as far as credible, believable, especially big. And I don't want to, well, I will use the word almost sounding outlandish at the outset. Oh, this UFO and it crashed and there might have been bodies in the Army Air Force. And there's so much to it, but you start stripping it away. And there's a lot of continuity in those stories between witnesses and second and third and fourth hand witnesses, unfortunately, that in my estimation does a lot to point towards the reliability or the credibility of the Roswell incident. That's certainly not the only one. I think that I am fascinated with Travis Walton's story. His abduction story also seems to be a heck of a lot of credibility to me as I analyze, the evidence that exists on that file. There's a handful of them out there. Roswell very near the top. And that's one of the two reasons I selected Roswell as the topic for my book. One, I'm already coming into it, with a good background of knowledge. And I think a lot of people, even if they're not hardcore UFO folks or even call themselves ufologists, at least have some tangential knowledge of Roswell. It's not this completely foreign concept to a lot of people. So that was one of the reasons I selected it. And then also going to your point, your question, I knew that there would be a ton of source material out there, because when you're writing, well, anything, but when you're writing a book, you have to have the source material to do the research to write the book. So, I picked a topic that was known, I thought, to a fair number of people, that I knew I could do justice with the story as well, based on the research that's out there.
So did you discover much new in your research than the main story? And for those that don't know the story, of course, they can get your book on Amazon if they want to know more. We'll put it up there again, and I'll put the link in the description as well after this. But could you share like the basic story, the Cole's Notes version, for people that might not be familiar with it?
Sure. In its shortest, easiest form, and I'll try to discern kind of fact from not necessarily fiction, but kind of leaps that people have made. In 1947, some material was discovered on a ranch just outside of Roswell, New Mexico. That I am 100% confident in. And that was found by a ranch hand by the name of Mac Brazel. Mr. Brazel picked up some of this debris through a series of events. It ends up with the sheriff. And from the sheriff, it ends up with the Air Force, the Army Air Force, out at the crash scene with the area cordoned off and picking everything up. From there, the story tends to fall apart, and thus the purpose of my book, because the question becomes, I believe something crashed. And I think everyone, even the government, contends, yes, something crashed. However, government conveniently spun it over to, well, it was a weather balloon that crashed. And the other half of the populace is saying, no, it wasn't a weather balloon, it was an extraterrestrial craft. So that's how we can establish, I believe, you got both sides saying, yes, something crashed. We have both sides agreeing that materials were sent down to Fort Worth, Texas, where General Roger Ramey was, and that part's been confirmed. And from there, and I have an interesting point I'll come back to, from there, the materials were then allegedly sent to the Wright-Patterson airfield just outside of Dayton, Ohio. And then the big intrigue is, what was it? And who done it? Was it a weather balloon? Was it a UFO? Were there extraterrestrial bodies? Because that enters the fray not too terribly long, after the initial incident. And Hannibal, one of the things you had asked was, what did I uncover that might not have been out there? Good question. And I did come across a piece of information I'll get to in a minute. And it's interesting because with Roswell, like any of these old stories, we don't have new information coming out every day or week or month or decade, right? We have sort of this closed universe of information. So on that line, I started thinking, well, okay, take everything at face value, and let's say a craft crashed and there were extraterrestrial bodies. The generally accepted version of what happened next after everything left Fort Worth was that all the materials, or quote, all the evidence was sent to Fort Worth, or pardon me, to Wright Pat. Well, I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, it would make a lot of sense for if there was a crashed craft for that to go to Wright-Patterson, given the type of work that they do at Wright-Patterson. However, I happen to have a source at the hospital at Wright-Pat, and this person told me that in essence, if there were extraterrestrial bodies, you sure wouldn't send them to Wright-Pat. You might send them to Walter Reed outside of DC. You might send them to the Presidio in San Francisco, but you're going to send them to the appropriate military hospital if you want to have an autopsy or pathology or whatever it is that you're going to have done. So I hear this from my source and I start thinking, that's a pretty valid point. Well, now remember, Roswell happened in 1947. Quick Google search will show everyone there was no hospital at Wright-Pat until 1952. So again, like unfortunately most of the evidence that we have, it's just simply anecdotal. But if you were to buy the Army Air Force's argument that, hey, we sent everything to Wright-Pat, well, query then, were there bodies, and why in the heck would you send extraterrestrial bodies to a base that doesn't have a hospital that can do any kind of research on them? So that was really the only true kind of nugget that I stuck pretty much with the story as it is. But I do find that if there were bodies, where were they sent? And I would stake it on wherever it was not Wright-Pat, which would just be another piece of, for lack of a better phrase, another piece of deception by the government.
So you have a contact at Wright-Pat, or they were at Wright-Pat at one point?
Yes.
Did they have any insights onto that base being closed down temporarily, the airspace above it during the whole drone incursion issues that were happening in December? Because I think it was closed down for something like 24 or 48 hours back then.
Yeah, Hannibal, I've heard that. I did not hear that from my source, and I didn't bring it up to that person, so I can't say, but I have heard that as well.
As far as the research process, can you share any insights on how you balanced historical accounts along with witness testimonies and creative storytelling when writing this book?
Sure. First, I should say 99% of the testimony in my book, and like any trial, a trial is just telling a story. So when you're selecting your witnesses, there's a lot of things that you're looking out for, but one is, will this person be able to carry the narrative of the story to its conclusion? And that was particularly true in my book because it is a book and there's some entertainment value to it. However, about 99% of the testimony that I included was not made up by Chris Johnston. Rather, I pulled it from previous interviews or documents or statements that were already made by those witnesses. So this isn't, so it's a very accurate historical fiction in that, like I said, I relied on what they said in a press release or what they said in an affidavit. So one, that helped guide the story, and two, that's why I can sit back and say, well, hey, if you don't like what witness A, B, or C said, you got to take it up with them because I was just reusing their own words.
As far as putting the readers in the jurors' seat for this book, what was your goal in structuring the book this way?
Sure. One of the goals of this book was to help people maybe have a little bit more of a critical eye about anything. And I'm not saying, oh, you look at everything like a lawyer. And I'm also aware that, there's the courtroom standards of admissibility versus you and me sitting at the bar and things sound believable and credible. But I thought that perhaps by structuring, a mystery like this in a trial setting, and you see the direct exam, and on direct, that's your own client, and you kind of get jurors going, yeah, that makes sense. Well, when it's followed immediately by cross-exam, suddenly everything that witness said, oh, maybe it's a little more questionable now. Maybe it's a little bit different. So that was one of the great things, to be able to have sort of the pros and cons right on, in essence, opposite sides of the page. So I hoped that people that read this might take that mindset in anything they do, or any mystery, or whatever they're looking at. So that was one of the big reasons it's structured like it is. Two, a lot of people like legal thrillers, be they books or TV shows or things like that. And so I will tell you, in my book, for example, all the courtroom procedure is 100% accurate and correct. From the moment they get the jury summons, to the moment they're being addressed by the clerk of court, to the moment they're being selected as the juror, then they go through the jury selection. Everything that I did, because I've sat through it hundreds and hundreds of times, is just what they would be experiencing in a courtroom. So I wanted people to have that. I said, well, if they, like Law and Order so much, let's give a little kind of behind the scenes, if you will. So I wanted people to be more critical. I wanted people to have some insight into the judicial system. And I wanted people to have an interesting story to read.
What are the main things that people debate about the Roswell incident? Obviously, I guess one of the main things is they did initially say it was a disc and then changed it to a weather balloon. Is there anything else that stands out to you that you could point out to us?
Yeah, the bodies, the existence or lack thereof of extraterrestrial bodies. And in my book, the lawyers, they do a pretty good job with that, because, well, I'll pick on a gentleman by the name of Walter Haut, for example. And for your listeners, Walter Haut was the public information officer at the base. He was involved with drafting the press release that said, hey, we found a disc. He was also involved in drafting the retraction saying, oh, our bad, there was no disc. So a lot of people point to Walter Haut as one of the people that said, oh, there were extraterrestrial bodies on this craft. Well, Mr. Haut executed, so signed, that's pretty much all that means, executed 2 affidavits that we're aware of during his life. One was in 1993, so you're already, 35, 40 years after Roswell, and then a second one about 11 years later. In his first affidavit, he talks about this thing crashed and it was all closed off and it was very top secret. Second affidavit, 11 years later, and so another 11 years after the event itself, he executes another affidavit. It's not until that second affidavit that Walter Haut starts talking about extraterrestrial bodies. And boy, you talk about burying the lead, in my opinion. Awfully strange that somebody's going to do an affidavit about everything that happened at Roswell and just forget the extraterrestrial bodies that they found. So that's an interesting back and forth between the lawyers and that witness on how and why something like that might occur. A lot of people also point to the local undertaker there in Roswell. And he said, it's a gentleman by the name of Glenn Dennis. And people go, oh, well.
Is that the guy that has the video out online? That's from like the early 90s of him talking about having to build caskets.
That would be him. And the interesting thing about that is the story that's out there about Glenn Dennis is that the military ordered these 4 small child size coffins. And so they called up Glenn Dennis. And from there, the story kind of goes, so Glenn Dennis, he took these coffins and he didn't know what happened after that, but he said he saw some bodies. That's not really what Mr. Dennis said. What he said was he got a call about these coffins. He didn't have any available. He could get them for the military, but it would take 3 or 4 days. So that's what happened there. Then Mr. Dennis tells us, and these are in subsequent interviews, that he decided to go to the base anyway, or the crash site, which, that one kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit, because it's like, well, why would you go there? You don't have what they need. But regardless, so Mr. Dennis went there. And then it came out later, he said, well, yeah, that's where I saw some of these bodies. But when pushed on it, there's this mysterious nurse, and probably some of your listeners will be familiar. When pushed on the topic, it comes out that Mr. Dennis himself didn't see any extraterrestrial bodies. Rather, there was a nurse, and this nurse told him, so enter the hearsay, the nurse told him that there were these extraterrestrial bodies, and he saw through an opaque window or something that may have been an extraterrestrial body. So at its outset, as often happens, Mr. Dennis sounds like this great witness for the believers. Oh yeah, he's got this squared away and he saw these bodies. Well, no, he didn't. You start digging into it and you peel back what, it's like the telephone game, Hannibal. You tell me something, I tell this guy, and by the time it's at the end, it's a whole different story. So there was a fair amount of that on Mr. Dennis. And then also, as it pertains to bodies, there was a military police officer by the name of Melvin Brown. And Mr. Brown, it was widely attributed to him that he saw extraterrestrial bodies. But again, when pushed on it later, it became, well, I was at the scene, everything was cordoned off, and they had these tents set up, and I could kind of see through this flap of the door from this angle what might have been the foot of an extraterrestrial. And all that all gets dropped over time and simply sticks with, hey, Melvin Brown saw bodies. Well, maybe, maybe not. Let's talk about what that means. I'm unable to hear you, Hannibal.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, got you now. Thank you.
Why do you think at first they announced that it was a disc? And then it changed, but it seemed like they were very confident in that first press release that they put out that they were going to basically say that as what it was.
That sounds like a simple question, but I think that's actually really profound. When you look at the players who are involved in this, and in particular, General Roger Ramey, who then had the retraction issued, they took the approach that, yep, our bad, it was a mistake. Some people thought this, the press release shouldn't have come out, but would that base, the only nuclear armed base in the world at that time, General Roger Ramey, who went on when the Army Air Force split to run the whole entire Air Force, would that guy make that mistake? And that's a tough one. That's tough to get over. So I think an easy and impossible approach to that first press release is they said it was a disc because it was a disc. And it wasn't until after the fact when they confirmed, holy cow, this is a disc. We can't let Russia, China, whomever the problem was at the time, we can't let anybody know. And that kind of became the beginning of, not just the Roswell cover-up, but all UFO, UAP cover-ups that are or aren't going on. So I think that first press release came out because either A, it absolutely was a disc, or they believed it to be a disc.
What did you think about President Trump saying at one point, I'm sure you've heard this, that he read the Roswell classified files and he found them very interesting?
Well, a couple things on that is, one, allegedly as of 1993, the U.S. government misplaced, burned, lost, recycled all Roswell evidence. It's all gone, according to them. And I think it's Operation Close Up or something. They gave it some fancy name, and I'm drawing a blank on it. So I guess I would query, number one, if Trump is saying that, then would that tell us that the Department of Defense or whomever is lying, that everything is gone or not gone? Or does that tell us that the stuff doesn't exist and somebody else is lying? Or, it's a tough call. Who knows on that? But I would imagine that, yes, if President Trump did read any of it, I'm sure it was very illuminating. And I guess we can hope with this talk about disclosure, I'm not sure how convinced I am about that, but with the talk about disclosure and transparency, well, let's see the receipts.
Yes, because I think Anna Paulina Luna said she was going to release not only the Epstein files, the UFO files, then the underwater UFO files. But so far, they've only really just released the JFK files, and it's not even all the JFK files. So do you think there is going to be more to come, or no? Why?
No. Well, that question to me anyway, it ties in. It's 100% on disclosure. My opinion on disclosure is it's going to happen in our lifetime. I'm hopeful. And it's going to have nothing to do with the U.S. government. It's either going to be another country government. You look at like Peru and Chile, France, some of these countries that seemingly are so transparent with their UFO information, yet, what do we get out of the U.S.? We get, virtually nothing. So I don't know why that would suddenly change. Whatever reasons they think, the populace can't handle it, it'll ruin the economy, it'll wreck religion. You hear the same tropes over and over and over. So I don't think the way our government operates, I am not optimistic that suddenly they're going to, oh, well, hey, by the way, I just don't see it happening. There are other countries out there that are already way more proactive on releasing their information, almost taking that approach of, we don't know, maybe one of you guys will know. So I'm thinking it'll come either from another government or something that the extraterrestrials themselves will do that can't be refuted. And that would be my preferred approach, but who knows?
Do you think it could be the extraterrestrials themselves not wanting to be disclosed?
I think it could be, and let's go back to, President Trump or any of the presidents. I could imagine something so heady, so, hey, Hannibal, I'm going to tell you this piece of information, but let me tell you, if you share this, A, B, C, and D is going to happen, and I can prove every single one of those things. I can imagine a scenario where I could share something with you and you would never say a word for the rest of your life about that. So on the one hand, I tend to think that if the presidents, get this information, it doesn't surprise me, that they're not coming out. So again, it kind of goes back to who knows. And also we have to remember here in the States, the president, whether they like it or not, it's a temporary position. And a lot of this, ultra top secret information doesn't get shared with any of the temps, be they president or the lady working in the mailroom. So if I could pick one person in the government to go to and they're going to tell me all the secrets, it wouldn't be the president, whether it's Trump or Kennedy or whoever it is. I don't know that they'd have the level of insight that, some career, big phrase around here, deep state, they would be, somebody I'd be more inclined to turn to.
Lisa has a question about the nurse that you mentioned earlier. Is it true she disappeared? She did disappear, and my connection to that is I'm sitting in my office here in Des Moines, Iowa. My main office is in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I lived in St. Paul for 30 years. There's two rumors on that nurse. One is she went to Europe, never to be seen again. The other is she went back to her home in St. Paul, Minnesota, never to be seen again. So I did spend a couple of days seeing what I could learn about nurses, post-World War II, military nurses, volunteer nurses, to see if I could link anything back to St. Paul, Minnesota, because, local connection. I thought it might be neat. I could find nothing on this nurse.
other than the occasional reference in the Roswell material about the nurse. But yeah, as far as I know, she disappeared. Nobody got a name. Nobody got anything on her.
What's the feedback that you've been getting from the UAP community since the release of this book?
It's been really, really positive. I kind of joked with my wife when I was writing this. I was like, look, I'm aware I'm not going to win a Pulitzer. That is not the goal here. But, I was a little bit nervous. You put anything out, any kind of work of art, and you kind of, how's this going to be perceived? But without fail, everyone that's read it and has gotten back to me has appreciated that the direct exam and the cross exam, to have it right there, like it would really be in trial. And I've had some people tell me, I always believed A, B, and C until your book and the cross exam. Now I'm on the fence on A, B, and C, or I've completely changed my position. And I don't, we think people can think what they want, but to me, it was a sign of, wow, I was fairly effective, with getting people to kind of weigh evidence and how they're looking at things. So it's been a really positive response.
Someone's making a comment that they know UFO Tar Heel says an Air Force declassification officer told him that Roswell was tied to the Japan balloon bombs of the 1940s, and we were trying to build something similar to this that crashed. Have you heard anything related to that?
I've heard that exact theory. I don't necessarily disagree. I do disagree with it only to the extent that I am, although I don't take a position in my book, I am a believer that an extraterrestrial craft crashed. Now, could I see the evidence? Could I be convinced that it's part, trying to mimic Japanese balloons? Sure. I had one caller, kind of a similar topic. I had someone call in and they were telling me that the bodies that were found were essentially orphans that were taken out of orphanages and treated with radiation to see how they reacted to it. And then he told me, it's one that everybody knows about it. I'd never heard about it. But again, and the only reason I bring that up, there's a lot of different, it was the Japanese balloons. It was these irradiated orphan kids. It was weather balloon. I've even heard, I don't really want to say any of these theories are crazy because at the end of the day, the Chris's and the Hannibals of the world, we don't know. We don't have the hard and fast answer. So I'm going to retract that and go back and say there really aren't any crazy theories when nobody knows the actual hard and fast truth.
What do you think about the alleged memory metal physical evidence from the Roswell incident? Memory metal.
Well, I think it'd be really cool if we could ever see it. Yeah. In the memory metal, since 1947, you'll hear about that memory metal at other crash sites and other kind of overlap. It seems to make some sense. Of course, unfortunately, again, Chris and Hannibal, we're never going to see this memory metal. One thing that is very interesting. So Major Jesse Marcel, who some of your listeners may have heard of, Jesse Marcel is in those seminal, the iconic pictures of the Army guy kneeling with the materials. He's representative of the guy on the front of my book. So Jesse Marcel was very involved in the very early days of Roswell. Well, and I go through this in my book a little bit in that he didn't say anything. And when General Ramey made him take the second picture with the weather balloon material, is Marcel's child and grandson, kind of spun this. He was doing it because he followed orders. He knew it was a bunch of hooey, bunch of hocus pocus, but he did it because he was following orders. So I kind of get into this in my book a little bit, it's important to follow orders. I got to follow orders. And why is that? Well, it's just continuity and people can, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we do know that the orders that Major Marcel got did not include, hey, take some of this memory metal to your house and show your family. So we kind of in the book go after him a little bit, sort of that, hey, don't be telling us that you think orders are so important when you're willing to go off of orders, right, and go take this stuff to your house. However, in so doing, he created additional witnesses to the memory metal. So he kind of, again, from a lawyer standpoint, that's sort of an interesting wrinkle. He did something he shouldn't have, but it actually turned out to have sort of a positive result for the believers of the situation.
Right. And this would be Jesse here, correct?
Yes, there he is.
Yeah. And someone did wanted me to ask you, and you kind of answered it there. What do you think about his credibility overall? Because he's been one of the outspoken ones, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Overall, I think Major Marcel has been pretty solid. He's been, nothing outlandish along the way. Some of these, he talked with his son and his grandson and some alleged kind of deathbed confessions. But I think he's kind of what you want for a witness. There was nothing along the way, a big financial motive for him. He wasn't advancing his career by talking about it. It sort of seemed like a man that had this experience and talked about it very limitedly during his life. I like Marcel. I think he'd be a good witness.
What are your thoughts of the cultural significance of the Roswell incident, and does it actually overshadow the actual evidence?
In reverse order, yes. The cultural implications way outshadow the reality. And again, we have to remember Roswell being kind of the first big UFO deal that really caught on. And now we've had 75, 80 years. And as I referenced earlier, the telephone game. And I've even given a few examples of, how things have changed over time, such as the bodies and whatnot. So by the time we're sitting here in 2025, the hardcore believers would, have us believe, oh yeah, everybody knows this ship crashed and there were UFO bodies, and the Army Air Force screwed up with the press release and they sent everything over to Wright Pat. Well, in the however long it's you and I have been talking, those 20, 25 minutes, we've already gone through. Well, the bodies, the jury, no pun intended, the jury is way out on those bodies, in my opinion, as far as the evidence goes. But again, so many folks don't think critically or dig into things. It's almost this accepted story, which for the believers on the one hand is kind of cool, but I would rather have a little more accuracy or deal with what we actually do know, especially when it comes to the bodies and who saw what and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think as often happens, our society makes a bigger deal about it or interprets it in such a way that it does overshadow the real evidence, which at this point is sparse, right? Because we never had available to you or me the actual physical evidence.
UFO Tar Heel again says, do you have any apprehension of Roswell based on some of the other crashes that were proven fake later around New Mexico, like the crash near Trinity at San Antonio, New Mexico, that Jacques Vallée wrote about?
No, I can look at Roswell very much in a vacuum, and it's one of those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. And just because, and Vallée is very, very, very well respected. Sure, he or anyone could have opinions all day long on crashes, E, F, Z, W, and it doesn't change, in my opinion, the actual facts and the evidence, the little bit of real evidence that does exist relative to Roswell. So that doesn't sway me, in my real job. All day, every day, I have insurance companies trying to tell me, well, did you know this, that, and that? Well, yeah, great. That has nothing to do with my case that, we're working on here today. So some of that might just be ego and being a zealous advocate, but also in reality, one doesn't necessarily affect the other.
The skeptics will argue that Roswell was a combination of misidentification, Cold War paranoia, and other embellishments. How do you address those people?
I would say read my book, and not even trying to be, cute with that, Hannibal or Kurt. It's just simply, I would need, something, give me your specific argument, on whatever topic you're talking about, and we'll address it. But when it's a global, well, the skeptics, they all, think that it was a weather balloon. Okay, well, we need to talk about the elements, that cause them to believe that, and kind of break them down or go through them one by one. I'm not saying I'd win. I might even come away going, oh, wow, that was a pretty interesting approach. But you really got to break it down, their argument, into little small positions and to talk about each one individually.
You already mentioned you believe this had to do with extraterrestrials. Could you elaborate on what your theory is? I know it's obviously going to be in the book, which again the link is here. It's on Amazon, but could you elaborate on what you think it is?
Sure. And to be just perfectly clear on what my position is, I think the evidence supports an extraterrestrial craft crashed. I don't believe it currently supports that there were bodies. So my takeaway, I'm willing to say Chris Johnston believes an extraterrestrial craft crashed, and I wouldn't commit to anything beyond that. It's all very interesting beyond that. But again, trying to look at evidence and look at continuity of the story. And with that big introduction to my answer, Hannibal, I kind of lost the point of your question. If you could
Well,
re-ask
that is what I was asking,
it.
what you think happened. So
Oh,
that's pretty much it, right?
yes, that's exactly what I think happened. I think the extraterrestrial body issue came into vogue later in the day. And of course, they didn't have likes and stuff at the time, but that's going to drive readership. That's going to be exciting. That's going to be different. I think that's how the topic of the bodies really got involved. And again, that's not to say it didn't happen, but looking at the evidence available to us, that's what I think. And you have to rely on, again, and one of the problems with my book and not having the physical evidence available, although I said all the courtroom procedure is correct, there's more hearsay in there than I would like. But again, we have a story that, we have to carry through. So, right. I'm convinced craft crashed. Don't know about the bodies. Maybe that volume 2 on that one.
How would you compare the Roswell incident to the Rendlesham Forest incidents in 1980 in the UK or the 2004 Nimitz encounter as far as credibility?
I would put it right up there. Now, the Rendlesham Forest, that is a favorite story of mine. That's a very interesting one. And boy, there were a lot, as you know, there were a lot of witnesses of varying degrees to what happened in Rendlesham Forest, the red lights off in the trees and this and that. And then just the two gentlemen, I believe that at least the one that touched the ship and the one that was there with him. There are another couple of guys who have kind of popped up in the last year, the flavors of the month on anything Rendlesham Forest, and it's obvious why. I find the two gentlemen, very believable, very credible. And I've only read one story kind of trying to debunk what happened at Rendlesham. And boy, there were so many leaps. Well, these red lights that you were seeing were a reflection of a lighthouse 11 and a half miles away that were hit. You got to go so far to believe the cover up, if you will, on Rendlesham Forest. Yes, I believe Rendlesham Forest to be a true encounter as well. The Nimitz, also an incredible story that would appear to me to be real. And the folks that were involved in that, as Commander Fravor, you've got some people that I'm not going to question them on their flight ability, their air time, everything that these guys do that you and I could never dream to be on that level. I think those pilots are very, very credible. So yeah, between Roswell and Rendlesham, those are great ones to compare it to. And I put a lot of weight in both of those stories.
To me, you seem like a very credible person, and you just gave a very intellectual answer about what you think happened at Roswell. As far as being a ufologist and attorney, what is your personal beliefs regarding extraterrestrial visitations to Earth in general?
I think they happen. I think that there's too many stories. There's too much continuity between the stories. And you get into the abduction topic, and I know you weren't exactly on abduction, but you start looking at, the red grid phenomenons that people will pop up with, indicating, hey, I've got these weird red grid dots, or they're kind of always popular, the scoop marks, that. So now at least you're going down a path with some actual physical evidence. There's a gentleman out there who removes, implants and what have you. So I like that area of study. I'm not I'm not sold that physical evidence that one supports the other, but I really like the topic. And that's an area that I'm optimistic, kind of like I said, disclosure will come at some point. Maybe it'll be something the extraterrestrials will do. So I hope they keep coming, and I hope they keep doing what they're doing, because eventually, probably someone smarter than me might be able to put something together and go, hey, this is what we have going here. So I believe that there are extraterrestrials that, I'm not going, I know there's a lot of people that, they're all over. There's probably one at the mall right now. I don't go down that path, because prove it, it's impossible. But again, kind of going back to my dad's thought, it's the height of arrogance to think that Chris and Hannibal are as good as we got in the galaxy. No offense. So why not? And if there was smarter, more advanced life out there, wouldn't there be somewhat of an interest in what the heck, we're doing here on Earth? So I do believe that they've been here, they come here, they do what they want. But then also kind of to something you said earlier, and for the most part, we probably aren't going to know it till they really decide one way or the other that we're going to know it.
As far as like the abductions that you mentioned, in a lot of these alleged abduction cases, I mean, you mentioned Travis Walton, that seemed to be like he got hurt and they may have just helped him medically and then released him. But a lot of the times it involves like collecting sperm or egg samples. What do you think could be done with these type of collections if that's exactly what they're doing?
Well, geez, well, now we can just be two guys spitballing. I'm no doctor, but let's take everything at face value, and let's imagine for a moment the extraterrestrials have the technology to come from X number of light years away. They certainly, if they can do that, I'm confident they could take a sperm and an egg and splice it and dice it and kind of do whatever they chose to do with it from a technology standpoint. So, of course, I certainly don't know. And that is one of those topics that a lot of people come back to. They were taking something out of me. A lot of times I hear it from women abductees. They were taking eggs, this kind of thing. So I suppose at that point, Hannibal, it's left for us to just speculate, on what they are doing. But I'm confident they probably could do just about anything that they wanted. I mean, heck, alien hybrids, giant humans, who knows?
What do you think they're doing underwater? And do you think this is the same group coming potentially from light years away that we're seeing coming in and out of the water? Or could this be a crypto-terrestrial group that are kind of based here without our knowledge and have been here all along?
Yes. And again, not trying to be funny, either one of those. So yeah, the USAs, I guess they're calling them now. I think, it could be either or, it could be none of the above. But if you were to travel from wherever to Earth and you don't want to be seen, as you and I were, kind of talking about earlier, what a great place. You go to the bottom of the ocean where Earthlings have only, explored 5% of it. Talk about a safe place, out of sight, out of mind, easy access to whatever research they may or may not be doing. But I would be more inclined to think they're, maybe if we equate it to humans, they're all extraterrestrials. Is there a group that chooses to live here long term and they live in the ocean? I haven't studied that topic enough. But again, going back to your Nimitz example, they had the underwater, the churning water, that whole bit. Am I ready to say that I believe there are some sort of life of that nature under the ocean? I do believe that. Now, are they there all the time? Do they come and go? That's where, kind of, for me, jury is still more out on that.
Do you think there's been actual communication between governments and these visitors? Because we always hear that there may have been some sort of deal reached between the government and these.
And you're right. We do always hear that, the famous, and then time went missing and the president was gone for a day and this and that. If that were the case, then we have to go back to really early in my interview, because if a deal was made between a president and the extraterrestrials, then it would stand to reason that each subsequent president would have to be informed of the same, right? And, politics aside, I have a hard time believing, to a certain extent, just because of the level of the news, if President Trump was aware that this was all 100% real and going on, and I'm not faulting President Trump, I would have a heck of a time holding my tongue about it. I don't know about you, and President Trump likes to talk, so it sort of seems the information would have had to carry through to him, and the president, all the presidents would have to keep it 100% confidential in order to maintain this. So, if there was a way to prove it and we had to put money down, my money would go on the side that no, that didn't occur. There would be so much involved. And why would the extraterrestrials, well, I know why we would think it. Why would they pick the United States? Why our government? Why our president? And what is the United States possibly offering to the extraterrestrials that some other country couldn't? And you don't hear about it a lot. So I really, and I have never been asked that, Hannibal, so I apologize for my kind of slow answer, but I don't think the evidence is there for me to buy that argument yet.
There seems to be a lot of legitimate documentation, incredible documentation that they are interested in nuclear warfare and visiting nuclear silos and things like that. Do you feel that they would they didn't stop it the first time, but do you think they would actually intervene, perhaps to protect their own assets or some type of effect that it might have on them if we were to start dropping nuclear weapons?
I don't think that they would. And the reason I say that is based on free will. We can start tying religion into this, and to me, that's kind of like saying, well, would God intervene and would he stop this from happening? In my opinion, the way I was brought up is no, he wouldn't. We've been given free will, and if we screw it up bad enough that we're dropping nuclear bombs on each other, then we kind of have what's coming our way. So the extraterrestrials, it's interesting how you put it. If we or something we have as an asset to them, would they have a vested interest in protecting it? Maybe. That's a great question, Hannibal, but I feel like to give an affirmative answer to that by me right now would be probably wishful thinking in a way to be able to help turn an eye towards some of the problems that are in the world right now, with this optimism that, the extraterrestrials take care of it. And although I am kind of out there, especially for an attorney, there's certain things that I try to remain pretty serious about, and that, the future of our world would be one of them. So I don't think they would get involved.
Right. And they might get involved in a bad way too. Like, okay, we've had enough of these people. We have bases here. They're going to destroy everything. It's time to put an end to this.
Yeah, we can get rid of the people and keep our assets.
Yeah. Quick question here. Do you think Wright-Patterson Air Force Base would still have crash materials?
Possibly, yes. So Wright-Pat, that's the differentiation I was making between their bodies and hospitals and their actual research that they do there. So Wright-Pat to me would be at least especially back in the 40s, because that base didn't really, blow up and get big until, the hospital came in 52, and then it started growing really after that. However, given their research and study on aeronautics, if something was to be re-engineered, I mean, unlike the No Hospital, they have plenty of metallurgy. They have plenty of engineers. They have plenty of the tech side at Wright Pat. So it wouldn't surprise me if it were still there, or if it's not there. I'm a big believer that a lot of these materials ended up in the hands of a third party, probably Robert Bigelow, and no longer subject to FOIA requests, and the government can plausibly deny it and wipe their hands and go, we don't have anything. Meanwhile, it's, all sitting out here with Bigelow, but they're still at least telling a half truth.
Do you have any thoughts on Dr. Stephen Greer's credibility? He's always in the news.
Approaching it from the evidentiary standpoint, first I should say I'm familiar with Dr. Greer. I know, some of what he's about, and I know his big thing is this CE5, right? And this summoning of UFOs, and he sells packages, and you and I could go down to his house and go summon some UFOs. So that's what he says, and I have also heard that on some of these excursions, hey, see this UFO? Well, at about the same time, a private small plane, coming out of a airport not too terribly far away, kind of giving the image of a UFO. So there's two sides to every story. And Hannibal, I haven't done enough of my own independent research on him to give an honest or well thought out opinion. So the jury's out on Dr. Greer.
There's a lot of this summoning of UFOs coming out lately with these Skywatcher people too. And to me, this is very hard to grasp, because if you can summon them so easily, it seems like there would be more evidence out there. But do you have any other thoughts on summoning UFOs in general and people being able to control them with their minds?
I do. I think that the ability to control them, that I don't buy at all. Here's my biggest piece in favor of the ability to summon them. One of probably the biggest constant that we hear from abductees is, well, yeah, they were talking to me, but it was just telepathic. All right. Well, if we take that at face value, I don't know the range of telepathy, like how far out it can possibly go, but if that's how they're communicating with abductees, then who's to say we couldn't, via telepathy communicate with them? So that is a tough one for me to get by. That's why I wouldn't completely poo-poo the idea, because again, hey, if that's how people are saying they're doing it, that's all we're doing, just back to them. Now, so I'll kind of leave that one there. It's entirely plausible given what we hear, how they communicate with us.
And last guy I'll ask you about, because we're getting short on time, is Lou Elizondo. He's had some stuff he's presented lately that he thought was real and was presenting it as real, and it's been proven not real. His book is considered fiction, but there's a lot of credible stuff to him. Where do you sit with Lou Elizondo?
I wrote an article for the MUFON Journal on disinformation agents. And I didn't name names. I just kind of laid out, I talked about some past disinfo campaigns and sort of red flags to look for. I think Lou Elizondo, at a minimum, has done a great disservice to the UFO disclosure program by coming out with those two photos that he showed, right? The chandelier and then the disc in the field. I don't care who you are. If you are the tip of the spear on anything, you have a responsibility and an obligation to vet what in the heck you are doing and what you are saying. You don't get the leisure of going up, and maybe I could, maybe you could, because nobody's going to care what Chris Johnston says. But when you have a Lou Elizondo of the world, who by all accounts seemed to really be trying to push this topic and push disclosure, pop up with 2 bogus photos and then cop out of it by, well, I just received this. You don't get to just receive it and then hold it up as true. So I like Lou. I like the work he's doing, but come on. 2 photos debunked in under about 30 seconds by the internet, and you're kind of running this whole deal and you're being exposed that way, sure creates a lot of questions.
And he also pulled out of a skiff appearance based on having a previous engagement of attending some festival recently, which seems like a bit of a lame excuse or a questionable excuse.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but I think that's the kind of thing my mom would say. Priorities, young man.
So your book is available on Amazon. Roswell, Truth, Evidence Speaks, You Decide. Why should people get this book?
It's a great way of presenting old information and in a way that it's never been presented before. If you really want both sides, some people like being spoon-fed, their version of events. If you want a critical look at most of the basic evidence and most of the big name players in Roswell and kind of have a look at both sides of their testimony, if you will, my book's a great place to do it. I think it's very interesting. And if you have any interest in, trial procedure, there's a quote on the back of my book a gentleman made. I want to get it right here. What did he say? It's like the X-Files meets Law and Order.
Well, do you have the book beside you? There we go.
Yeah. So this is, we got a representative of Jesse Marcel right there in the stand. And here's the attorney holding, what would be some of that unbendable metal.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your insights. It seems like a very interesting book. I'll let you wrap this up with whatever you want to tell the viewers.
All right, great. Well, first of all, Hannibal, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. As Hannibal said, my book is available on Amazon. However, if you want to learn more about me and get the book, my Iowa law firm site is lawgroupofiowa.com. About halfway down the homepage, you'll see a picture of my book and a big red button that says Get Chris's Book. And also on that page is my professional bio on the drop down under attorneys. If you want to learn any more about me, what I actually do, and different representative clients and awards and things like that. It's a pretty robust website. So either way, but otherwise, just keep being critical and keep asking questions.